Hello friends, welcome back to Strategic Management and to this last session after a long journey of 59 sessions. And now I wish to conclude in the form of a summary as well as derivation, a conclusion in literal sense. Where have we reached? What we may have understood, what we should have understood, what I intended to go for, where did we reach, and hopefully you would endorse that. It has been an enduring journey and I hope it would be benefiting you in due course of time and for a long time for that matter. So let us begin with what we have come out with. You see, and I am going by lecture numbers which we have gone through. And at this stage, I wish to acknowledge the support of our e-cell here, who have been very kind enough to help me in recording all these sessions. Mr. Sarath here, the coordinator of this cell, all the team members of this cell who have been helping us day in day out to do this, and they have been very cooperative and I really feel indebted to them at this particular stage. I definitely feel hugely largely indebted to Indian Institute of Technology Roorkee, who has given us this opportunity and platform wherein we can deliver these subjects to you. I feel indebted to NPTEL as an organization governed by IIT Madras, wherein they are running this whole show, their team which has been very consistent in supporting us all through. And then a special thanks goes to 3 of my scholars who have very specifically helped me in every way in culminating this subject as of today. Ariba Anjum, Nan Kishore and Neha. All these 3, they have worked very hard to come up with content, references, slides, helping me, guiding me, what is to be done, what kind of delivery must be done, what kind of content should be generated, and they have worked very hard for this. And they would be going along with this course with you in due course of time, helping you in assignments as well. So here we go, lecture 1 to 5, we talked about strategy, strategic planning and strategic thinking. And just to reiterate in front of you that strategy is an integrated and coordinated set of commitments and actions, as you would remember we talked about that, designed to exploit core competencies and gain competitive advantage. We talked about competition and beyond competition as well. That means making the competition irrelevant, blue ocean strategy, competition, red ocean strategy. We talked about environment as well. I would be coming to that in a sequential manner. Then strategic planning and strategic thinking. Strategic planning involves creating a roadmap that enables an organization to achieve its goals and the responsibility of executives. Strategic thinking, on the other hand, is a mindset and technique that everyone in an organization can and should practice. It involves looking at one's work with a broader focus and across a longer time frame than usual. And here we refer to tactics, strategic plan, short term versus long term plan as well, short term versus long term strategy as well, because we talked about that strategy is a long term path, bifurcated or partitioned in terms of shorter strategic steps, which we call strategy. So this is what we did in session 1 to 5. Then lectures 6 to 7, we talked about strategic management and strategic management process. There had been a time wherein we tried to emphasize on particular things more, because those are the important elements of our understanding towards strategic management. So strategic management, and this is the name of the subject itself, strategic management is concerned with determining the long term goals of an enterprise and deciding on the most appropriate course of action to achieve them, considering changing environmental conditions, resources available and risk attitudes. Strategic management process, we talked about that. Developing a strategic vision, mission and core values, setting objectives, crafting strategy to achieve the objectives and company vision, executing the strategy, monitoring development, evaluating performance, initiate corrective adjustments, revise as needed. We talked about in our last segment, 2-3 lectures back. Then here we refer to business policy also, corporate culture also, and we emphasized upon values. I talked to you about values in a greater extent because this is the context which actually builds several kinds of things basically. Then lecture 8 to 12, we talked about strategic leadership and organizational life cycle, which is the guiding force. So, strategic leadership is the ability to anticipate, envision, maintain flexibility and empower others to create strategic change as necessary. Organizational life cycle, just to reiterate, corporations, much like products, go through various stages of development from birth to maturity to decline. A corporation's business strategy, structure and goals usually differ in each stage of life cycle. The organization must be managed by executives with the skills to cope with the demands of each stage of corporate development. Here we refer to vision, strategic vision and mission, and this became a building block for us. We tried to understand everything in consonance with the vision, which is deciphered in terms of business vision, and then mission is crafted out of it. And due references to all the definitions and everything we talked about have been continuously given to you, and we have tried to fetch literature from all the relevant texts and research papers from wherever we could, as best as we could. Then lecture 15, 16, 17, we talked about substitution, alternatives and generic competitive strategies. I tried to emphasize upon that we have to look towards things with the perspective of providing substitution, and that is where we were talking about competition and beyond competition. We started building up the case around beyond competition, and we were talking about competition precisely wherein substitution is related to use something or someone instead of another thing or a person. We talked about this, how organizations look at competition with this kind of a perspective. Then we talked about alternatives, something that is different from something else, especially from what is usual, and offering the possibility of a choice. And here comes, this is what we tried to decipher, generic competitive strategies, wherein we talked about market target and type of competitive advantage being pursued, and overall low cost provider strategy, brand differentiation strategy, focused differentiation strategy and focused low cost strategy associated with best cost provider strategy. So, this we discussed at length as far as the whole structure goes, and we tried to pursue this till end in few of the sections when we refer to strategy implementation also, refer to these during that session. Then we talked about business ethics, we talked about cultural values, we talked about culture, we talked about the cement which binds everything basically. And I tried to emphasize upon this aspect because this aspect is closely associated with being visionary in our own sense, because I have been trying to continuously emphasize upon the fact that prosperity and opulence is the key, and that is to be brought by everyone for whole of this world largely. And in my last session when I was talking about COVID-19 situation, we specifically tried to analyze these things, that if something of that sort unfortunately happened, then how we came out of that. That was really associated with values and ethics all through. Business ethics is the application of ethical principles and standards to the actions and decisions of business organizations and the conduct of their personnel. Ethical behavior in business situations requires adhering to generally accepted norms about right or wrong conduct. I tried to decipher this in front of you because strategy is a long term path, vision is there in a distant time, at a distance from us. So, reaching there requires so much of courage, integrity, and you see, all these things, intrinsic abilities, make business sense at the end of the day. And we talked about school of ethical universalism, school of ethical relativism and corporate social responsibility at large, and we reached to a conclusion that CSR should be an imbibed part of an organization's orientation rather than an additional kind of a task. Then we move towards lecture 21 and 22, and I am trying to broadly put these things in front of you and simultaneously trying to put up a conclusive aspect to it. how should we be thinking in terms of strategy and strategic management, and the key would always remain the same: strategically managing value chains for developing value webs at the end of the day, and management of strategy for prosperity and opulence for all. Sustainability as a strategy in the current world, that is what we talked about. So, increasing levels of pollution, over exploitation of resources and the continued deterioration of our planet has put the onus on organizations and people to take steps to avoid global crisis. Looking into the idea of sustainable business practices, we explored how to design sustainable corporations, taking into consideration different examples of several organizations. How to design sustainable corporations which may keep going. Longevity of an organization's life is the objective, and that may happen with some conditions involved, and that is where sustainability comes in. So, environmental sustainability with organizational sustainability, they are deeply interconnected with each other. Lectures 23 to 24, we talked about environment, strategy and structure, the coherence and the relationship, and I devoted, I emphasized upon these things a lot basically, because this is how we can sustain ourselves at the end of the day if we understand this relationship well. This got reflected when I started talking in terms of as far as strategy implementation goes, and when I referred to sustainable development goals and ESG framework also, and I would be coming to that. So, we explored in depth about how the environment shapes strategy and how strategy shapes the environment, and I enumerated examples in front of you. I tried to describe those. The interconnectedness of environment, strategy and structure was explored, discussing different models including Porter's 5 forces and strategic palette. Environment was considered both from internal and external perspectives, and that is we have been continuously referring to. Further going into how strategy impacts it and how structures can evolve from it in due course of time. And in the implementation part also we talked about how strategy defines the structure and keeps evolving that. The situation of organizational structures creating and shaping strategy and in effect changing the environment was also taken and was described for you. And all the case studies and examples which we tried to put up in front of you are demonstrative of the fact what we are trying to project here. We have tried to take examples from organizations who have gone through a journey of 150 years, 100 years, and I have been continuously talking about my own organization, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, which is here for 178 years now. How this organization has been sustaining its excellence in accordance with the sustainability around itself. That is the message I want to give as far as your understanding goes. Then in lecture 26 and 27 we talked about resource based model, wherein the model revolves around the assumption that each organization is a collection of unique resources and capabilities, and this uniqueness is the basis of a firm's strategy to earn above average returns. That is where we started wondering about where to invest money, why to invest money, how to think of a business proposition with profitability perspective and so on, and to what extent should we be thinking about that. The example of Amul was used to understand the concepts of resource based model and make a connection with the earlier idea of strategy shaping structure. As I said, these organizations, they have come up so well, they have done so much that they are institutions by themselves in terms of the understanding which we are trying to develop, and that is why I reiterate such kind of examples. I have been talking about Amul, Tata's, Patanjali, Indian Institute of Technology, Roorkee, SBI, LIC and several kinds of organizations all through, which are demonstrative of whole lot of our understanding of strategic management as a subject itself. Meanwhile, lecture 27 looks more into the basics of resources, capabilities, core competencies and how they affect the value chain. The industry organization model is also covered in the lecture using the example of a global shipping giant Maersk, and there I tried to elaborate upon how industry organization model should be taken into consideration for our thought process around strategy and strategic management. Then lecture 28 we talked about industry life cycle also. We have been wondering in terms of organization's life, but organization belongs to, is associated with a particular kind of an industry, and we have been talking about generating value chains and then creating value webs. So many industries would be involved there. So, we have to understand industry life cycle as such. So, we further explored the concept of industry life cycle and discussed its relevance and evolution. The idea of product life cycle, how it evolved through different disciplines of marketing, economics and medicine, and how the product life cycle paves the way for the industry life cycle was also explored. The Abernathy-Utterback or AU model of the industry life cycle was considered, and relationship between PLC and ILC and OLC was touched upon. Then we came up to understand blue ocean strategy, lecture 30 to 35, and I tried to emphasize a lot on this, wherein this is actually a different kind of a perspective from that side. We have been looking at a strategy with the perspective of competition from this side. So, from that side, following the discussion on red ocean, the blue ocean strategy put forward by W. Chan Kim and Rennie Mobon was intensely discussed by me. From understanding the definition, the discussion moved into the differences between the red ocean and blue ocean strategy. Value innovation was also discussed at length, and how organizations can create blue oceans, and that was precisely in lecture 30. So, you see, value innovation perspective, how to generate value and along with innovation, and how to think about that. The analytical tools in the blue ocean strategy like strategy canvas, 4 action framework and ERRC, eliminate, reduce, raise, create, grid were explored, along with the 3 characteristics of blue ocean using different examples, which was between lecture 31 and 33. The final lecture on blue ocean strategy looked at the 6 principles of blue ocean strategy, going in depth to all of them one by one. And we tried to emphasize that how different businesses have come up because of this strategic orientation, or how they have been demonstrating this, how they have actually made the competition irrelevant and gone for creating a new market space for them, creating new market boundaries for themselves, and how focus, divergence and compelling tagline can be used with the perspective of developing or creating blue oceans. Then lecture 35 to 36, I talked about strategic entrepreneurship, and we further discussed the topic of strategic entrepreneurship, understanding the meaning of an entrepreneur and how strategic entrepreneurship evolves as a combination of strategic management and entrepreneurship. The concept of strategic entrepreneurship is explored further through the input process output model. On the other hand, lecture 36 checks on the role of strategy in value creation and how it is balanced, how it is a balanced approach through stakeholders and shareholders. The concept of value creation was studied in detail using the example of Dubai as a system which came up, basically a complete ecosphere, a business sphere actually, while also connecting it with the blue ocean strategy. How the proponents, they thought of converting that city into a blue ocean of sorts. Then 37 to 40 came in fortune at the bottom of the pyramid and capitalism at the crossroads, and the lectures dived deep into looking at strategy from different perspectives by deciphering the findings of prominent authors, Professor C.K. Prahalad as well as Professor Stuart Hart. So, in lecture 37, the fortune at the bottom of the pyramid concept by Professor C.K. Prahalad, it is the details are discussed. The lecture defines the idea of bottom of the pyramid, the influence of dominant logic in bottom of the pyramid, the nature of bottom of the pyramid, and the 12 principles of innovation for bottom of the pyramid markets, and how to develop those markets by an inclusive mindset. Capitalism at the Crossroads by Professor Stuart Hart is studied extensively in lecture 38, touching upon the 3 economies, money, traditional and nature, and how it creates a collision of course. And you see, when we talked about black swans and when we talked about other elements of stop predicting, this nature element came in strongly and prominently. Then we talked about strategy levels. When we are thinking in terms of strategy formulation, strategic choices and implementation, we have to think in terms of levels of strategy, and that was between lecture 41 and 43. We began our conversation by delving into business strategy, examining the process of crafting one. So, business strategy is the development, alignment and integration of an organization's strategic initiatives to give it a competitive edge in the market. We then delved deeper into corporate level strategy, exploring concepts such as levels of diversification and the reasons behind diversification, and we studied strategy strategy levels in a pyramidal structure. And levels are associated with 4-5 stages or levels. So, that is between lecture 41 and 43, wherein low levels of diversification, single business, dominant business is there, that is what we talked about. Moderate to high levels of diversification, related constrained diversification, related links we talked about. Very high levels of diversification wherein unrelated diversification was discussed, and we talked about the elements associated with those in detail. Reasons for diversification: value creating diversification, value neutral diversification, and value reducing diversification. Then we reached towards lecture 46 and 47, wherein we started talking about strengthening a company's competitive position, and you see again we shifted our concentration towards being competitive, although we have already discussed about bypassing the competition or making the competition irrelevant. So, here we discuss the strategic actions a firm can take to complement its competitive approach and maximize the power of its overall strategy. Strategic moves, offensive strategy, defensive strategy, timing of strategy, execution, first mover advantages, first mover disadvantages were also discussed, and scope of operations. We defined strategy through scope of operations as well. Then we talked about vertical and horizontal integration, mergers and acquisitions, and I tried to specify that why should we be requiring mergers and acquisitions at all. So, lecture 48 to 50 we talked about this. So, our discussion shifted towards integration strategies, where we distinguished between forward and backward integration before delving into mergers and acquisitions. Following that, we explored the reasons driving acquisitions and the typical hurdles encountered during this process, and we defined vertical integration, merger and acquisition. Then we shifted our concentration towards corporate governance, how to govern this complete kind of a situation, how it is closely related with policy on the one hand, ethics on the other hand, and what is the role of board of directors, and how employee compensation or senior level executive compensation works, kind of those kind of. So, governance mechanisms were also discussed, but while we started discussing corporate governance between lecture 51 and 53, we dedicated a substantial portion of our conversation to unpacking the concept of corporate governance. This included an in-depth exploration of agency relationship, the challenges posed by agency problems, and associated costs as well. Additionally, we delved into various governance mechanisms to address these issues, as I was trying to say. So, internal governance mechanisms wherein ownership concentration, board of directors, executive compensation was discussed. External governance mechanisms talked about market for corporate control, and corporate governance 2.0 was discussed, that how it should be, how Subramanian talks about that how it should be actually. And then we talked about strategy implementation, evaluation and audit. We observed that strategy and structure have a reciprocal relationship, highlighting the interconnectedness between strategy formulation and strategy implementation. After familiarizing ourselves with various types of structures, simple, functional and multi-divisional, we explored strategy structure matches, including business level strategies and the functional structure. You see, and that is why we built up the case around strategy and structure earlier, so that at the level of implementation we should revisit that with the perspective of implementation. Corporate level strategies and the multidimensional structure were also understood in association with each other. And finally, we reached towards black swans, and stop predicting during lecture 57 to 59, and in between we started discussing sustainable development goals, environmental, social and governance framework. And just to because those were the recent discussions we had, because by the time you reach here those were the recent lectures, but I wish to emphasize that this is a full circle of sorts, wherein while talking about black swan and stop predicting, our discussion culminated in an exploration of Nassim Taleb's concept of black swan and the hidden role of chance in both life and the market. And then we talked about stop predicting, revisit life. Why should we be thinking in terms of black swans? Anything may happen anytime. Why should we stop predicting? Doesn't mean stop forecasting or forcing at all. That doesn't implies that, because we cannot stay away from planning and policy and those kind of things basically. Stop predicting means that somehow we should not be overwhelmed with as far as this whole situation goes. We should be focusing upon what we should be doing best, and that is precisely, that complements the long term perspective of strategy being a long term path, that complements our zest to reach to the vision for making this world a better place, for prosperity and opulence. And that is precisely why we included SDGs and ESG framework here in our discussion basically. Because if you will remember 17 SDGs, you would realize that ultimately every goal is associated with making this world a better place, and every goal demands, motivates business organizations specially to participate, because business propels the economic circle basically. So, these goals, they emphasize, they demand, and they hint upon, they motivate that how these things should be collated with each other basically, and that is where precisely environmental, social and governance framework comes in. It emphasizes that how SDGs can be enumerated in terms of environmental aspects, social aspects and governance aspects, where we presented that, that structure in front of you. Ultimately, the journey started from vision, came towards the implementation and execution and monitoring, and then it started backwards, wherein we tried to discuss that how these goals have been defined for whole of this world and how these things complement each other. You start from that side, you start from this side. It must complement, everything should complement each other basically. So, that side, this side, vision to these goals, goals for reaching to the vision. That is all about strategic management, strategically managing value chains and developing coherent value webs to propel prosperity, to achieve greater prosperity and opulence for all through management of strategy. This is all about strategic management. Thank you for being with me for all these 60 sessions all through. I hope you would have enjoyed these sessions, and I hope it would have been a learning experience for you. Thanks again. Goodbye.